And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. It's great to be with you today. I am Gary Michuta, your host and sensei for this hour. And we are going to talk about Purgatory, of all things. You know, Purgatory is one of those doctrines that is a point of contention between Catholics and Protestants. And there's actually a lot more to Purgatory than you might imagine. And it's not just merely a few different proof texts that you can help show people, but the doctrine itself is pretty full. And in fact, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of non-Christian groups, religions, actually have a working understanding of Purgatory. Now, it's not as precise as that in Catholicism, but it does show that this basic idea of purification after death is not solely something within Christian revelation, that it's something that's based on reason that other religions pick up on, and of course it's developed even more within Judaism, and ultimately it comes to us through Christ and his church. So we're going to talk about Purgatory, and there's no better person to do that with than our good friend, Master Apologist Karlo Broussard. It's going to be coming up on the other side of the break, and we're going to talk about his book, Purgatory is for Real, which just came out from Catholic Answers Press, hot off the presses, so to speak. Good news about the afterlife for those who aren't perfect yet. So we're going to talk about that. And this probably will be part of a whole series that we're going to be doing on Purgatory. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Karlo will be coming up on the other side of the break. Also, I want to... we're going to do, on this side of the break, we're going to look at informal fallacies with our Finding the Fallacy segment. Today's fallacy, by the way, is the appeal to pity. And also, we're going to meet an early church father. Yesterday's early church father, Quadratus, was quite obscure. Probably not a lot of people knew about him. Today, I pretty much bet that no one else, this person is not any more well-known than Quadratus. But nevertheless, he is part of the early church fathers and does offer some important insights into the beliefs of the early church. It is Victor of Vita. Victor of Vita. So, got lots of great stuff in store for us today. And, you know, as always, let's begin by warming up the dojo by welcoming all of you, beginning with those watching live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. As I turn my attention over to the social media section of the dojo. Hey, Ricky. Hey, Nellie. Hey, everybody. Hey, Dave. Welcome aboard. And also, I want to welcome all of you listening on radio around the country. You can't see me, but I am waving. Hello. And also, I want to welcome all of you listening and watching via podcast. It's great to have you on board as well, not only here in the United States, but also throughout the Northern Hemisphere and also around the world, either through our handy-dandy phone app or by our flagship website, which is virginmostpowerfulradio.org. And hopefully you guys have checked it out, by the way. Great website, lots of cool stuff. Phone app also, lots of free goodies on the phone app. And as I always want to encourage you, you know, at the dojo, it's great that you do exercises. We fill our minds, we sharpen our intellects to be tools in the hands of our Lord for evangelism and defending and explaining the faith. But don't leave it here, you know, don't turn off the program and think that that's all there is to the deal. No, you need to go out and practice it. And you do that, you could do it through social media. So tell people about the program. Share some of the stuff you learn on the program with other people. Do do evangelism. And the cool thing with the social media is you can do it from the comfort of your own seat. You don't even have to move. You could do it through email. You could do it through other ways. And I highly encourage that you do it through sharing programs, telling people about the program. That helps us in our ministry, and it helps you, and it helps the people you share it with. Also, if you're on social media and you see Virgin Most Powerful Radio on there, please smash the subscribe button, do the likes, hit the bells, do all that other stuff, because that helps our visibility. And that's one thing is when you're on a radio network like ourselves, visibility is so important because we want to be an outreach to people who need the information we're giving. So I want to thank all of you who have subscribed. Also, I want to thank you in advance for subscribing and liking and doing all that stuff. Like I say, every episode, it doesn't cost you anything. It's just a click of a button. And who knows, if it brings somebody closer to Christ, then praise God, you know. All right, so without further ado, why don't we jump to our Finding the Fallacy segment. Today's Finding the Fallacy, by the way, is the appeal to pity. The appeal to pity is a fallacy in which someone tries to win support for an argument or idea by exploiting his or her opponent's feelings of pity or guilt. It is a specific kind of appeal to emotion. It also goes by the name, a.k.a. The Galileo argument, which says that it refers to the scientist suffering as a result of his house arrest by the Inquisition. So basically it is trying to gin up the emotion of pity or guilt in order for people to be more open to accept your position. Not using evidence or arguments, but just manipulation of emotions. This happens a lot in apologetics, especially formal debates, things like that. Debaters will often try to sneak in some highly explosive emotional content in order to poison the audience opinion of their opponent, or perhaps to win favor of their, pity for their own position. This occurs a lot. You know, you will go on debates and people will talk about the burning of John Huss or, you know, other things as well. I kind of laughed. I got this off the internet, the definition. The Galileo argument, the suffering of that scientist as a result of his house arrest. And if you ever look into the Galileo affair and see exactly what was his quote-unquote punishments and how hard it was for him to be in front of the Inquisition, you would laugh and definitely do a serious eye roll. In fact, I think you probably need surgery afterwards by the extent of the eye roll. Because, man, if that's torture, what Galileo went through, and then bring it on. Because I wouldn't mind a little bit of that torture. All right, so that's beside the point. That's our Finding the Fallacy for today, the appeal to pity. Let's jump to meet the early church father for today, who is Victor of Vita, flourished around AD 485. Little is known of Victor. He was the bishop of Vita in the African province of Bycina. He's the author of History of the Persecution of the African Provinces, which recounts the terrible suffering that Catholics in Africa underwent during the time of the Vandal kings, Greshric and Hundric, I believe is how you pronounce them. This persecution, as bloody as any under the imperial Rome, was not a general persecution of Christianity as such, but of Catholicism as distinct from Arianism. Vandals were at least nominally Christian, but like all the barbarian Christians who, with the later exception of the Franks, their Christianity came to them in Arian form. And so there actually was a bloody persecution in North Africa that was raised by these Vandals, Arian Vandals. The history of the persecution of the province of Africa, like I said, was written sometime around 488, 489. He wrote it while Hundric was still alive, and so that means it's before December 484 AD. The last chapter of the work, recounting Hundric's death, is a later and unauthentic addition to the work. The work is not published, however, until 488, 489 AD. And let's see, yeah, I think we have time to do maybe a quote from it. This is Victor of Vita's History of the Persecution. He says, quote, because we profess that there are two natures in the Son, that is, true God and true man, having body and soul, whatever the Scriptures ascribe to him, that is of sublimely excellent power, we know that's attributed to his wonderful divinity. And whatever is told more humbly of him, which is below the dignity of the heavenly power, we refer not to the Word of God, but to the manhood which he assumed. This then, as we remarked before, is said in regards to his divinity. The Father and I are one, and whoever has seen me has seen the Father. But there are other sayings which refer to him according to his humanity, such as the Father is greater than I. So a great apologetic hack by today's early church father, Victor of Vita. Whenever you see in the New Testament something that's ascribed, like he says, you could be ascribed to Christ in terms of his divinity or in terms of his humanity. And by the way, if you're talking to Jehovah's Witnesses or people who deny the full divinity of Christ, they will bring up only those texts that refer to his humanity, such as the Father is greater than I, and other such verses as well. So you need to remind them of the other side of the equation, right, of those verses that speak of his divinity as well. And that is our early church father for today, Victor of Vita. Coming up next, we have our very good friend, master apologist Karlo Broussard. We're going to be talking about Purgatory is for real. Stay tuned, folks. More to come on the other side of the break.
Psalm 119 says, "Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light to my path." According to St. John Paul II, being a Christian means saying yes to Jesus Christ. It consists in surrendering to the Word of God and relying on it, but also endeavoring to know better and better the profound meaning of this Word. May God grant that we always rely on His Word, read it often, and put it into practice.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is?
Will it be a boy?
Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Mary Ann Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
Welcome back, everybody. Hands on Apologetics, and we are going to be talking about, I think, everybody's favorite subject, which is purgatory. Actually, a very, very important subject in terms of Catholic apologetics. And to help us do that, we're going to have our good friend, Karlo Broussard, who is a native of Crowley, Louisiana, and for more than a decade traveled the country teaching apologetics, biblical studies, theology, and philosophy. Karlo has published articles on a variety of subjects for Catholic Answers magazine. Of course, we all know him as a part of the staff apologist at Catholic Answers Live. And he's also a frequent blogger at Catholic.com. Karlo holds undergraduate and graduate degrees in theology, and he's also was apprentice of Father Robert Spitzer. And we are going to be talking about his brand new spanking book, which is called Purgatory is for Real, Good News About the Afterlife for Those Who Aren't Perfect Yet, by Catholic Answers Press. And Karlo, welcome back to Hands on Apologetics.
Hey, Gary, thanks for having me, brother.
Hey, it's great to have you on board. And I was thinking, you know what, if you need a Christmas gift for somebody who is not perfect, this is the book for them. Talk about a niche market there.
You're not perfect, loved one, but I do love you.
That's right. And here's a book to help you get to heaven.
Right.
Yeah. So how have you been? We haven't chatted in a while.
I've been well, Gary. I've been well. It was great. I was back on the road last week, went back to Louisiana to do a mission on the intercession of the saints and to reflect upon St. Joseph at a St. Joseph's parish in Iota, Louisiana. And yes, Iota, it's very small. And I was able to hang out with my folks a little bit, my mom and dad, saw my sister. So there was great times, man. And doing some work here at Catholic Answers, geeking out on Aquinas' 5 Ways, working on a short course for a webinar for that. So I'm having some fun.
Nice, very nice. You know, I've never been to Louisiana, and you know, how is the weather like around this time of year there?
It's up and down. It fluctuates. One day it can be warm, and then the next day it can be freezing cold. You know.
Okay.
And when
define warm and define freezing.
Yeah, well, like 19, 20 degrees.
Oh, really? It gets that low?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and even when it's not that low, even when it's like, I don't know, 45, 50 degrees, it's still cold because of the moisture in the air.
Yeah.
And so it's not a pleasant cold by any means. It's bone chilling.
So I guess why don't we start by, I want to ask you, why a book on purgatory? What led you to write this book?
Well, it was sort of a practical reason, namely that purgatory is the #1 research topic at Catholic.com. That's what people ask about the most, both on the website and even on the radio show. You know, when we do shows that are sort of geared toward conversations with Protestants, or we do sort of an open Q&A on doctrine, purgatory is like always asked about. It never fails. And you would think, Gary, that purgatory is sort of a dead horse that's being beaten because it's been written on so much in the sort of the modern advent of apologetics, the movement started by our founder here, Karl Keating at Catholic Answers. You think it would be a dead horse, but in fact, Gary, it's alive and it's bucking, man. It still weighs heavy on people's hearts and minds, both Catholic and Protestant. That's what's unique about the topic of purgatory, because Catholics are just as interested in it as Protestants are, and particularly for sometimes for different reasons. But it is true that Catholics are interested in it because that's the topic they're often asked about the most from their Protestant friends. I mean, a little anecdotal evidence here. I remember many years ago when I was working in Louisiana, I used to travel to these convenience stores and count inventory and cash audit. And I was behind the counter counting the cash. And there was some dude who came up to the counter, and I had an intuition that he was just sort of a pastor kind of guy, right? And I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said something that spurred me to go around, chase him down outside, and to thank him for his witness to our Lord, because he must have said like, God bless you, or mentioned Jesus or something. So I chased him down in the parking lot and I said, brother, I just wanted to thank you, you know. And so he said, so where do you go to church? And at the time I said, you know, St. Michael's Catholic Church. And I emphasized Catholic. This is when I was ready to talk to anybody and everybody about Catholicism, right? And so the first question that he fires back with was, well, what's this business about purgatory, right? I mean, like, didn't even have any sort of cordial conversation like, oh, I'm glad you're a Christian. You know, it's just purgatory was right off the bat. So a little piece of evidence there that it does weigh heavy on people's hearts and minds. And so that's kind of the reason why I wrote the book. And then secondly, Gary, we simply did not have a book here at Catholic Answers on purgatory. So we have a book on Mary. Tim wrote that. Jimmy wrote a book on salvation. Trent, he's written a book about almost everything under the sun, but nobody wrote a book on purgatory. And so that was a hole that they asked me to fill. And I'm grateful that, you know, the team here asked me to write it because I think it was divinely anointed. I think the Lord was moving me to write this book, and I'm glad that he willed for me to do it. And hopefully it'll help some folks out.
Yeah. Yeah. Purgatory is one of those strange doctrines that there's so much really gross distortions about. I mean, non-Catholics come up with very odd understandings of purgatory. And quite frankly, I mean, sometimes even Catholics do too. So, you know,
Amen to that.
This is a great book, you know, add some clarity. And I agree with you. It's weird that all the stuff that's been written, I mean, not only, you know, in the modern Catholic apologetic movement, but way before. I mean, there's some great books on purgatory. Catholics have been defending it, explaining it for so long, and yet it just still persists, all these misunderstandings.
It is true. Yeah. And, you know, as you mentioned, that was one of the other reasons why I wrote the book, was to try to navigate those waters and bring some clarity, because you have some Christians say it's not real. We Catholics say it's real. So that's a question. Yeah. Is it real? You know, our Protestant friends will say it's not in the Bible. Catholics say we can provide biblical support. So who's right, who's wrong there? And then even within the realm of understanding the nature of purgatory, you have some Christians who in the past have articulated the reality of purgatory in such a way that it seems only to be doom and gloom. And it seems to be nothing but just a step above the fires of hell. And then you have on the other end of the spectrum some modern Christians who present purgatory as nothing but a cleanup job and a lack of emphasis on the suffering involved. And so the point of the book was to try to find a happy medium between those two extremes, to affirm, yes, suffering is a real part of the purgatorial experience, and in the theological tradition, you have strong evidence for its intensity, that it will be intense. But at the same time, we also want to highlight the joys of purgatory. And that's something that I do in the book, the good news about purgatory. Not only does it provide consolation for us as believers, it inspires us to pursue holiness, so it's sort of beneficial for us, but also there are certain joys bound up with purgatory that go beyond the joys of this life. And I think it's important to have both and in our picture of purgatory, simply because it's true, right? Yeah. And also for pastoral reasons, because one can get so hung up on the torments and the suffering and the pain that they lose sight of the joy. And so it's not, you sort of lose the joy that's appropriate for us as Christians concerning this mystery of faith, or this infallible teaching of the church that describes the afterlife.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, even that's a point of contention, because I know for a while you would have people who say, oh, we don't believe in purgatory anymore. That was done away with indulgences. That's right. And
yeah. And even if not that, I've encountered priests, unfortunately, who have tried to teach me when I was in college and stuff. I remember very vividly a priest asserting that purgatory was not an infallible teaching, affirming it that it was a part of church teaching, but just not an infallible teaching. So some will say, we don't believe in it anymore. Well, I disprove that. And others will say, well, we believe it, but it's not really infallible. So if you don't believe it in the interior movements of your heart, you're not going to be under the pain of mortal sin type of thing, right?
Right.
Well, I disprove that as well, because in the chapter where I go through the magisterial survey on purgatory, sort of purgatory in magisterial teaching, I think is the name of the chapter, I point out those 2 points in the history of the magisterium where it has taught the doctrine of purgatory infallibly. I don't see any evidence, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, later in future shows when we go through the book, but I didn't find any evidence in my research that the church taught it infallibly as divinely revealed. And consequently, I don't see any evidence that it's a dogma, so it's not found in the deposit of faith, but nevertheless, it is taught infallibly by way of the authority of the magisterium. So it is an infallible teaching, and that's something I show in the book.
Yeah, very good. And yeah, that's like I said, it's funny how it's a thorny issue, and surprising in terms of official declarations. I know I did my own. I mean, it's probably nothing in the scope you've done, but not a lot is said about purgatory in terms of official teaching of the church.
Yes, so it's very restricted. So the boundaries, the sort of the room in which the area, the arena, right, in which we're able to plant our feet firmly concerning purgatory is very, very small. You know, the boundaries are very restricted concerning what is official teaching of the Catholic Church. And beyond those boundaries, we get into speculative theology, and where we're looking in the theological tradition and we're seeing great minds in the theological tradition arguing for certain conclusions, but that are simply within the realm of speculative theology and not within official teaching. The church does affirm quite a bit. I mean, there's enough there. There's enough content there to sink your teeth in, right? And so there's enough there to construct or to paint this picture of purgatory, something that we can see, that our minds can grasp, and that we can affirm. But at the same time, there are many details about the nature of this purgatorial experience that go beyond what the church has officially said. And so this is true. But you bring up a good point, Gary, because it's interesting that people are so hung up on purgatory and talk about it so much when there is so little official teaching about it.
Yeah, right.
But nevertheless, there is official definitive teaching, and we need to defend it and articulate it in a clear way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and not only that, but also, I mean, even with Orthodox, there's different understandings and stuff.
Correct.
But it, like you said, it's like in terms of official teaching, there's a core there, but there's things that are speculative, and it's good to make that distinction. I hear the music coming up. We're chatting with master apologist Karlo Broussard about his new book, Purgatory is for Real. Stay tuned, folks. More to come on the other side of the break. You're listening to Hands on Apologetics.
Logan, what has Virgin Most Powerful Radio done for you?
Well, Virgin Most Powerful Radio, I got to say, I've been a listener for about a year now, and it's really helped me grow closer to my faith and the fact that I'm listening and I'm getting unsugar-coated, clear, charity with clarity Catholicism. And it has really helped me even, grow so much deeper in my faith as a young man and discern the priesthood and have a love for Jesus Christ. And this is so seen on the Terry and Jesse show on Virgin Most Powerful, the unsugar-coated, clear truth of our Catholic faith that is so lacking today. It's almost like the Terry and Jesse show. It's the orange juice Catholicism. It's filling things up. I just need to give my shout out, my praise. I'm just so appreciative. It's just really helped me, and I know people want to hear this. It inspires me to want to speak it, and it inspires me to even go as far as discerning the priesthood to think I should speak this. We need to stand up for our beautiful faith. This is the unsugar-coated beauty, and this is just what I've seen on the Terry and Jesse show. I encourage so many listeners to start donating and support this cause. It has just really impacted my life, and all I just want to give is some praise to it.
If you shop on Amazon.com, there's an easy way to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Just visit smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center under the desired charity. Now, when you log into your Amazon account and purchase products, a portion of it will automatically go to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio at no cost to you. Thanks in advance for supporting CRC and VMPR, and may God richly bless you and your family.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands On Apologetics. We're chatting with Karlo Broussard about his brand new book, Purgatory is for Real. Good news about the afterlife for those who aren't perfect. And it's a fantastic treatment. I'm slowly working through it, but, it's actually a quick read, very readable, lots of great information. And Karlo, I have to give you props because I'm not aware of any book on purgatory that I've read that starts off by looking at non-Christian religions and their primal beliefs of that, which is really cool. I honestly, I never considered it. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Yeah, so what I do is I wanted to start off by showing that purgatory is not just a Catholic thing. Even when you look at, it's not just a Catholic thing in both non-Christian religious traditions and in non-Catholic Christian traditions. And so that idea is unpacked and fleshed out in the first two chapters of the book. With regard to purgatory, at least some aspects of purgatory being found in non-Christian religious traditions, what's operating here, the argument here is simply to show that to believe in a post-mortem state of temporary suffering on account of wrongdoing, that's an idea that's general enough across religious traditions that one has at least reasonable grounds to think or at least take serious that may very well be an accurate description of the afterlife. And this argument came to mind, and I was inspired to make this argument in the book from St. Robert Bellarmine, right? As he writes, those matters upon which nearly all nations agree can hardly otherwise come about except from the natural light common to all men. The idea is that God is guiding these folks to some truth, even though it's mixed up with some error. And you can tease out that general idea of a postmortem temporary suffering on account of wrongdoing. And in this line of reasoning, similar to belief in God, or at least belief in a transcendent reality and the religious activities associated with such a belief. Religion and belief in the transcendent is a human universals. Right. This is something that crosses boundaries of cultures and religious traditions. And when one is faced with that data, with that evidence that this is a human universal, we find it so prevalent among human cultures and human belief systems that one is on good, reasonable grounds to think, wow, this is the way the world really is. This is the way reality is. And so I'm putting forth an argument similar to that to say, listen, when you look in these various religious traditions, non-Christian religious traditions, you find the general idea of a postmortem state of existence of temporary suffering on account of wrongdoing, and even the remission of one's faults. And given that data, one who rejects purgatory at least has reason to take a step back and say, well, maybe there is something to this idea, given its universality. So that's sort of the point of going through this survey to try and give evidence for purgatory, at least aspects of purgatory, being found in non-Christian religious traditions. So that's sort of the argument or the reason for the survey. But what I do in the chapter, Gary, is I just give a brief survey of going through a few non-Christian religions, for example, Hinduism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Greco-Roman belief, and then, of course, finishing it off with Judaism itself. And seeing that, you find belief in a postmortem state of existence of temporary suffering on account of wrongdoing, and also postmortem remission of sins in the case of Judaism. So that's sort of the setup of what I'm doing in that chapter. I don't know if you wanted to go into more detail than that.
Yeah, let's do it, just because I don't think this is an area that's really explored. But
right.
I love the underlying reasoning because it fits well with theistic apologetics, like with the appeal to the numinous, at least maybe not as a proof that God exists, but it does show that there is this kind of underlying universal understanding based on nature that everyone appeals to that.
And one thing to keep in mind too for our Catholic viewers out there, we don't believe in purgatory because of this evidence, right? We believe in purgatory based upon the teaching, the infallible teaching of the Catholic Church. But this evidence does give one good reason to believe or think that this may very well be the way the afterlife works, right? So let's just take one, for example, let's take Hinduism and the Hindu religious text called the Vedas. There's mention of a place called Naraka. Now, that's a realm in the afterlife where beings suffer for their sins. They receive judgment and their proportionate punishments by Yama, a Rigvedic Hindu deity who is Lord of Death and Justice. Now, it's said that Yama's assistant, Lord Chitragupta, keeps a record of the deeds of every living being. And based on those deeds, he sends souls of the deceased either to Svarga, which is like a heaven, or other regions of Naraka, or even earth, depending on the kinds of sins committed. And we find out that once they satisfy the punishment due to them, these souls, that is, they're released to be reborn. And so that such souls can be released from their punitive suffering and be reborn either in heaven or on earth, whether in human or animal bodies. That leads many Hindus to conclude that Naraka is not an eternal damnation. So it's a temporary form of suffering. Now, of course, what parallels the Catholic doctrine of purgatory here is simply the idea of a post-mortem temporary suffering on account of wrongdoing. Now, we don't have to ascribe to everything that's being recounted here concerning Yama and Yama's assistant and Naraka and the nature of Naraka and being reborn in other bodies, etc., but just teasing out that idea of a post-mortem temporary suffering on account of wrongdoing. That parallels the Catholic doctrine of purgatory. And that's enlightening, to see that idea embedded in this non-Christian religious tradition as if God were guiding them to some truth, even though it's entangled and mixed up with all this error within their belief system. We also see in Buddhism that they also refer to Naraka as a realm of the underworld and where beings are punished for their wrongdoing. And in Naraka, there is a temporary suffering that takes place, but rather than a single being determining that, it's the law of karma that sends them to Naraka. And once their negative karma is used up, they can be released. And the impermanence of such post-mortem punishment, as I point out in my book, has led one scholar to conclude it's likely that this is why many of the early translators of the Buddhist canon have preferred using the term purgatory rather than hell. So, granted, we would deny their rejection of hell within the Buddhist belief system, right? So, because we Christians affirm hell exists. But that they have this intuition of a temporary post-mortem suffering on account of sins, making up for those sins, being punished for those sins. That's an aspect of their belief system that parallels or matches up with at least one aspect of the Catholic doctrine of purgatory, namely the discharging of the debt of temporal punishment due for sin. Now, I also talk about Greco-Roman belief. And so I look at a couple of examples, Gary. I look at, for example, Plato's Gorgias, in his Socratic dialogue, Gorgias, and we don't have time to go through the whole text there, but basically he's talking about those who are on the river Acheron, right? And there they dwell and are purified of their evil deeds, having suffered the penalty of the wrongs which they have done to others. They are absolved and receive the rewards of their good deeds, each of them according to their deserts. And so what we have here in Gorgias is Plato distinguishing between two groups of people in the afterlife. Some, he says, have committed crimes such that they are incurable and they're hurled into Tartarus, and they never come out. But Plato contrasts those souls with these other souls on the river of Acheron who are being purified. And so we have this element of a temporary post-mortem purification of the sins, of the evil deeds, and suffering on account of those evil deeds. And then, of course, we also have Virgil's Aeneid. We find the same principle, a post-mortem punishment due to sin. And even fire is used as an image of purging the soul. So the motif of purification represented by the image of fire seems to be something universal, right? It's not only in the Christian tradition, but we find it in these non-Christian religious traditions as well. That's sort of a universal image to connote purification, namely fire. So that's going to match up with sort of the traditional renditions of purgatory. And then, of course, to sort of cap off this non-Christian religious tradition of purgatory or aspects of purgatory, I have a part in this chapter where I talk about Judaism. And of course, the classic text that we can refer to is 2 Maccabees 12, 38 through 45. Now, in the book here, I'm not appealing to this passage in 2 Maccabees as the inspired word of God. I'm simply appealing to it as a Jewish historical text, a window into the Jewish belief about the afterlife about a century before the time of Christ, and also you could argue that at the time of Christ as well. And it's important, Gary, to point out that 2 Maccabees 12, 38 through 45 provides sort of a theological background or a theological milieu in which Jesus is going to come and say things about sins being forgiven in the afterlife. Mm-hmm. So it's important that we emphasize 2 Maccabees 12, 38 through 45 as a historical backdrop. And we're going to talk in later segments together when we talk about Jesus' teaching in Matthew 12, 32, for example. But I know we're fixing to come up on the break, so maybe on the other side of the break, we'll pick up on this view of purgatory in Judaism.
Yeah, absolutely. We were chatting with Karlo Broussard about his brand new book, Purgatory is for Real. Get it at shop.catholic.com. It's a great book, and we have more to come on the other side of the break. Stay tuned.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone, and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He was kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle, and he says to me, "Hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great." And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the morning. Mm-hmm. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show in the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Daniel, what a testimony. And I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we come to understand." According to St. Augustine, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. May God grant us a strong living faith in Him and His divine plan of salvation, and help us to believe so that we may understand.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. We're chatting with Karlo Broussard about Purgatory. Purgatory is for real, his latest book from Catholic Answers Press. You can pick it up at shop.catholic.com. It's a great book. Excellent survey of this interestingly complex yet simple idea. And right before the break, Karlo, you were going through non-Christian religions who have a working understanding of purgatory. And specifically, we got to Judaism because that's ultimately where Christian belief springs from, right?
Sure.
Christianity is the fulfillment of Judaism. So 2 Maccabees 12:46, it's a holy and wholesome thought to pray for the dead that they may be loosed from their sins. Even, when was that written? Even in the 1st, 2nd century BC, there was this Jewish understanding.
Yeah, what we find in 2 Maccabees 12 there is, Judas Maccabeus had some fallen comrades, and they found the sacred tokens of the idols of Jamnia, which the law forbids the Jews to wear. And when they came upon that, we're told that they turned to prayer, beseeching that the sin which had been committed might be wholly blotted out. That they are praying for the departed soul, thinking that it has sin upon it, that it's still guilty of the sin, and that it needs to be remitted, necessarily implies that they did not believe the departed soul to be in some post-mortem state of bliss, much less heaven, right? Nor did they think that the departed soul would be in a post-mortem state of eternal damnation, because they would not have thought that a soul in eternal damnation could have its sin be blotted out. There would be no need for their concern that the sin be blotted out, and no need of the prayer. So that they're praying specifically for the sin to be blotted out necessarily implies that the Judas Maccabeus and his soldiers who are engaging in this practice of praying for the dead believe that the soul is in a postmortem state of existence, neither heaven nor hell, where sins can be remitted. Well, that matches up with the Catholic doctrine of purgatory, at least one aspect of the Catholic doctrine of purgatory, namely postmortem remission of sins, a final purification of any remaining guilt of venial sin. And then, of course, we're also told in the same passage from 2 Maccabees chapter 12 that Judas actually took up a collection, man by man, to amount of 2,000 drachmas of silver, and they sent it to Jerusalem to provide for a sin offering, right? And they made atonement for the dead, we're told, that they might be delivered from their sin. And we're told by the author that Judas and his soldiers acted very well and honorably in doing this, all right? So we have this piece of evidence from Judaism to suggest that the Jews believed in a post-mortem state of existence, neither heaven or hell, where sins could be remitted. Now, we also have evidence from Second Temple and Talmudic Judaism. It's well attested in their literature, namely this idea that there's a post-mortem temporary suffering on account of sin. And one example that I point out in my book, Gary, is the Tosefta. It's a compilation of Jewish oral law from the late 2nd century, about the period of the Mishnah. And Tosefta means supplement. So it acts as sort of a supplement to the Mishnah, a compilation of oral law of Judaism. And in the Tosefta, we discover that the Shemites, the school of Shammai, believe that some souls remain in Gehenna for only a time, during which they are purified and eventually released. As professor of Jewish studies at Temple University, Simcha Paul Raphael states, Gehenna served as a realm of purgation and purification. After this experience, the soul is sufficiently purified and able to enter the supernatural postmortem realm of Gan Eden, or the Garden of Eden. And I actually provide the excerpt from the Tosefta where we find this Shemite belief of a temporary purgation in Gehenna, that for some souls it is not an everlasting torment, but that is only temporary purgation. So that's the Tosefta. And then I sort of briefly survey a few first century pseudepigraphic Jewish texts, falsely attributed Jewish texts like the Apocalypse of Zephaniah, Testament of Abraham, Testament of Isaac. And we find in these pseudepigraphic texts the same idea, postmortem, temporary punishment / suffering on account of wrongdoing. And then I finish it off by appealing to a few Jewish prayers for the dead. So you have, for example, the Jewish recitation of the Kaddish on behalf of the dead. And that prayer involved a prayer to help bring to an end the suffering of the soul of his departed father or grandfather. So it was the son. It's a prayer that could be prayed by the son or the grandson on behalf of the departed father or grandfather, that the soul's suffering would be brought to an end. And then there is the El Malay Rakamim prayer, which is a prayer usually prayed for the departed soul at a burial service at the graveside or during memorial services in the year. So I give that prayer there. And basically, the prayer consists of a prayer for God to provide a sure rest for the departed soul, and that the departed soul shall rest peacefully at his lying place. So we see even in these later century Jewish prayers, right, these Jewish prayers matching up with the traditional Jewish prayers for the dead that we find in 2 Maccabees chapter 12. And so when you collect all of the data, you see that these aspects of purgatory, postmortem temporary suffering on account of wrongdoing, prayers by the faithful on earth assisting the departed soul having sins remitted in virtue of the prayers of the faithful on earth. These are all aspects of the Catholic doctrine of purgatory that we're finding in non-Christian religious traditions. And so that at least has to give someone a reason to take a step back and reconsider one's rejection of purgatory and say, well, man, this is pretty universally held stuff. And so at least I would have good reasonable grounds to think this is likely is the way the afterlife really works.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's a beautiful argument. Very intriguing. Especially, with Judaism, we often forget that Jews today have essentially their own working understanding of purgatory. There's a story I always tell this. Probably I've told a couple of times on the program about a fellow who called up a photography shop in New York that was run by Hasidic Jews. And, he's an apologist. And he's like, well, what do you guys believe about purgatory? And the answer was, oh, we have a washer and dryer too. It's just like, yeah, we believe that. Sure. I mean, it's right. Funny. So it's not something that's uniquely Christian per se.
That is correct. That's correct. So it's not all that eccentric, right? And so that's the non-Christian religious traditions that I survey. And then in chapter 2 of the book, Gary, I go through a survey of identifying purgatory among non-Catholic Christians. Yeah. So we see it among various Christian religious traditions as well. You mentioned Orthodox Christianity earlier. We have the given between Catholics and Orthodox is the connection that is expressed by Christians on earth praying for the dead. That is something that is a given. They acknowledge some postmortem state of existence where a departed soul exists and can be affected by the prayers of the faithful on earth. Now, as to the nature of that postmortem condition of the soul, or the condition of the soul in that postmortem state of existence, there's a variety of opinions among Orthodox Christians concerning the condition of the soul. So as I point out in my book, some Orthodox Christians will deny that the departed soul is undergoing any form of suffering or pain on account of wrongdoing, deny the motif of purgation, and simply affirm there existing neither heaven nor hell in a state of existence that we can assist them in. And they don't really go much further than that in articulating, well, what are we assisting them with, right?
Right.
But yet again, you also have some Orthodox Christians, for example, from the Eastern Orthodox Synod of Jerusalem in 1672, affirming that the souls and these departed souls endure the punishment due to the sins they have committed. So some Orthodox Christians affirm the departed souls undergoing temporal punishment for past forgiven sins. So you have a variety of opinions on the condition of the souls. And then within Protestantism, what I survey there, Gary, is I start with Luther. Martin Luther himself affirmed purgatory at the advent of the Protestant Reformation in 1517 several different times, but would flip and deny purgatory in 1537, calling it a doctrine of the devil. So you have Luther affirming it, then flipping and denying it, but looking, and then even the 17th and 18th century German philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, he believed in purgatory, and he actually affirmed the temporal punishment aspect of purgatory, unlike many other Protestants who deny any form of temporal punishment in purgatory, but would affirm other elements of sanctification. So, for example, C.S. Lewis, in his letters to Malcolm, he affirms purgatory by way of praying for the dead, and also he affirms purgatory in as much as it's going to involve the completion of our sanctification, but denies that purgatory is for the purpose of discharging any remaining debt of temporal punishment due for sin, which is an essential aspect of the Catholic doctrine of purgatory. And then what I do is I survey Jerry Walls in his book, Purgatory, The Logic of Total Transformation, where he affirms purgatory, but like C.S. Lewis, he denies the Catholic idea that purgatory involves discharging of debt of temporal punishment remaining for sin. So that's a denial, but he affirms other aspects of purgatory that involve sanctification. So whether it be moral growth or being sanctified, purging unhealthy attachments, getting rid of any remaining guilt of sin that might be on the soul, these are things that we would agree with, and at least it's enough to say he believes in purgatory. So that's sort of the survey of the non-Catholic Christian religious traditions on purgatory. So there's got to be something to Christian revelation there about purgatory if all these Christians are coming out with it.
Yeah, certainly. And not only that, but it's it seems like it's anchored in the idea of justice as well. So that even
that's right,
Christians
and Leibniz picked up on that. Indeed, he did.
Oh, okay. Yeah, very good. Well, hey, Karlo, I hear the music coming up. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks, Gary. I look forward to the next time, brother.
All right, absolutely. And the book, by the way, is Purgatory is for Real. It's available at shop.catholic.com. Pick it up. All right, man, the hour's flown. It's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center here, turn off the dojo lights. Thank you so much for listening, and God willing, we'll be back again tomorrow to do this thing we call Hands on Apologetics. Coming up next, Terry and Jesse. You don't want to miss it. Stay tuned.